I see Fauci over the last few months. Now his power seems to be diminishing in some ways in America right now, but had been seen for many months almost as America's high priest of healthcare. All right, is he a high priest of healthcare that America should trust, or is he someone that should not be trusted?
He's really, yeah, and I never worked really for him other than that for the decade when I was looking at the neuroimmune diseases. He's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, so they paid more than $10 million to my institute under my direction as grant. So he's by definition my boss if he pays the bills. In the 80s, when I was at the National Cancer Institute, that National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease is another institute, but we work closely together because the National Cancer Institute, my laboratory, was part of the team. Well, Dr. Rossetti, I was part of Dr. Rossetti's team at that time, a youngster who isolated and confirmed HIV's existence and association with the disease AIDS. So because it's an infectious disease, NIAID worked very closely with our laboratories. And from that time, literally from the first time I ever heard his name or his voice in 1983, this man has been literally pure evil, without any good intention other than for himself, for glory, fame, money, power, and it didn't really matter how many people were murdered under his watch. Was soon realized that the way those viruses got into 6% of 4 to 6% of humans in America and cause disease in millions, autism, myalgic encephalomyelitis, Parkinson's disease, chronic Lyme disease, lots of cancers, leukemia, lymphoma. It was realized that was via vaccines that had been contaminated with animal tissues, including aborted fetal tissues, since at least the late 80s and 90s. So the way that people got infected was contaminated blood supply, contaminated vaccines. We published our work in premier journals, in the premier journal Science. And when it was realized that the most likely way these mouse viruses got into humans was our practice of using mouse and animal cell lines as manufacturing facilities for vaccines and viruses. And then we injected them directly into children. That was when my life as I knew it was ended. My career was ended. I was arrested for refusing to renounce the data, for refusing to change the data, for refusing to cover up the data. This is all the subject of our books, Plague and Plague of Corruption.
We're in the midst of a constitutional crisis. We're in the midst of a church crisis. This could be the largest falling away from a Christian ethos we've ever experienced in America. Rights are being challenged and trampled over and ran roughshod over. It's because of medical reasons, probably bad science. People have their different opinions, and that's why we have Dr. Judy Mikovits here with us today, who is a brilliant mind, worked for years in this area, and I'll let her tell you a little more about what all her background is. I do know she had extensive research with the outbreak of HIV, AIDS, worked with viruses, worked in this type of field, also worked with Dr. Fauci for many, many, many years, and got some questions to have. So Dr. Judy, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today. And why don't you just tell them just briefly your background, what your expertise is, and also, I hear from many of my friends that you are a believer in Jesus Christ of Nazareth. So tell them a little bit about yourself, Dr. Judy.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Pastor Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. I have a undergraduate degree in natural products chemistry and PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology. I spent 22 years since 1980, since I got my undergraduate degree at University of Virginia, at the National Cancer Institute, making therapies, purifying natural products, including immune therapies, type 1 interferons, our own biological response modifiers program, biological response modifiers in the biological response modifiers program in 1983. So we basically made therapeutics for AIDS and cancers associated with AIDS, leukemias, lymphomas. We discovered animal viruses, families of animal viruses called retroviruses. This is what the AIDS retrovirus, the AIDS associated virus that was a retrovirus called HIV. In 2009, we made the unfortunate discovery and isolation of a new family of human retroviruses, human disease-causing retroviruses called from mice. I won't worry about what they're.
We've heard a lot of talk, all of us, about gain of function research.
Right.
And how these viruses are amped up. They're trained, if you will, right? To become more deadly, more efficient. It's like taking a kid with the right frame for football, giving him to a Division I football program and making a monster lineman out of him. Explain to me, that's what you're saying when you say pandemic. Was that a part of the game?
Yeah, because a natural evolution, the way God made and everything, every animal has its own virome, has its own endogenous microbes, microbiome, virome. We've been infected over the millennia, and our immune system silences those viruses. So when you mix animal tissue, and this is why the vaccines are a problem, in order to manufacture a live viral vaccine like influenza, you have to, the manufacturing plant is a continuously growing vat of cells outside the body, outside of anything of nature. We call it transform. We make these cancer cells. We grow them in the lab. We grow them in fermenters like craft beer or wine, 250 liters. We attenuate the virus, that is, weaken it, the influenza, put 3 or 4 live influenza strains in bird cells, in chicken eggs. And then we take all of that and we inject that into a human. And so birds have retroviruses, coronaviruses, along with the influenza viruses. You inject everything that came out of those animal tissues. So that's manipulated, that's manufactured, that's accelerated evolution, because God didn't make us that way. And in fact, in Leviticus, and I'm not a biblical scholar, but in places, what very early on, don't mix blood. We've got cow blood in vaccines. We've got pig blood in vaccines. In MMR, in the polio vaccines, were where these original mouse viruses came. So in polio vaccines are grown in monkey kidney cells. The SARS-CoV-2 virus was manipulated in the lab, worked with in Wuhan, at Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland, in vero monkey kidney cells. In the same monkey kidney cells, we grow the enteroviruses, because these cells, it doesn't matter why, it's a manufacturing plant. So you pick up contaminants, other viruses from monkeys, and you inject them directly into the blood. This isn't how God intends us to see an infectious agent. And that's why I say it's infection by injection. And this is not of God, this is not of nature, and we're paying for it because we as a society haven't looked. We've been told for 20 years, my sister, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, she's been telling us 20 years of data showing and studies and classes, all the contaminants, the cow blood, the pig blood, but what's in these shots. And we know, we're warned not to do that biblically. We didn't eat pork. Why would you inject it? We do know the extent of the damage that the last 40 years of mixing animal tissues, including aborted human fetal tissues, has caused our world.
Wow, there's a couple things I want to ask on that. Doctors like Fauci, Birx, Redfield, these people get government dollars to do research.
Correct.
Right? The money's coming in from taxpayer dollars to do the research.
Correct.
Okay, can they also own the patents and financially benefit themselves on the selling of a vaccine?
Absolutely. And that law changed with the Bayh-Dole Act of the late 70s or early 80s that it came into its BAYH and Bob Dole, D-O-L-E, the senators that allowed, and not just Fauci to patent. It allowed everyone who receives federal funds to patent their work, have the intellectual property, make money off of taxpayer money, and then turn around and sell products to taxpayers based on that intellectual property.
Obviously, as pro-lifers, which most of us are pro-lifers on this call, that's abhorrent to us. We would never be a part of that. That's something that for us, it's a no way over my dead body.
Right.
Speak to us on that issue, number one. And number two, what could be the consequences of not only firing or injecting, I should say, use the right term, injecting animal DNA, but then also other human DNA, right, into a person?
Right. Well, there are two cell lines that are primarily used, and they're cell lines. One called WI38, and see, people won't know reading a vaccine excipient list. They won't know what that means, so they don't think anything of it. The other one is called MRC5 cells. One is, and I don't know which one is from, a fetus that was, aborted at about, about 8 months, late term abortion, and the other just after birth. So it was a fetal tissue in that respect. And one is male, one is female. So if you inject on the first, and they're often injected, they often contaminate the same vaccines where you have, say, cow blood. So you've got cow and aborted fetal tissue viruses and pathogens in the same injection. So your immune system only knows what's self and what's non-self, and it's so from the day you're born, let's just say you're a male and you're injected with a lot of the WI38 proteins, nucleic acid, of a female. You're going to start being confused, if you will, in your development, because your body's first going to go over there and put out that fire and make clear that non-self. And what we see, the explosion of autoimmune diseases is we're attacking ourself. Because we've injected this in the first hours of life and in the first months of life, never before 1980s, we got vaccines. I'm 62 years old. We got vaccines when we were 5 years old and walking in school, walking and talking. And we line up. Now we're injecting them before we've developed a microbiome, when we're still breastfeeding, when we're still, we don't have immune system. We haven't developed the good microbiome, the good bacteria in our gut that help us. So we're destroying life literally from the second we're born. And before that, we never gave a pregnant woman a vaccine. What are you thinking? You're not. Right.
We found it hard to get people to come to church when they're scared they're going to die if they come to church, right? Tell us, how do we combat Christians right here, and they're from different parts of the country too. How do we combat that fear factor that if you don't social distance, if you don't have a mask, if you don't do these things, you are going to drop dead? Give us some wisdom. Help break it down for a pastor. What do we do to kill that monster of fear? Because I'm watching right now, our congregations we're we're probably running about 65% of what we did pre-COVID. And that's pretty good number if you look nationally. So give us some insight from a doctor. How do we communicate that to our laity and to the people we lead?
Well, I think the first thing is, and I say it, everybody who knows me knows it, I pray with my feet. And I think of Pastor Rob McCoy in our area in Thousand Oaks in Ventura County. So and our pastor Mike at the church in Ramona, they both opened up. Our church, Community Presbyterian Church, is still closed, and the two churches I named in that acknowledgement are still closed. And so we found another church because it's not our belief. So what we do with our feet, go there. Rob McCoy has thousands of people in that church every day, most without masks. If you're fearful, wear a mask, but don't hate somebody who's fine. Healthy people absolutely don't spread disease. I am absolutely infected with XMRVs, HIVs, because of the lab workers that were the first to get caught. It's chapter 8 of our first book, Plague, tells you the government knew a decade ago that the viruses, these cancer-causing viruses from mice, are contagious. The first people who caught them were the lab workers, including me. So I'm perfectly healthy. There's absolutely no way, and they're spread the same way that SARS-CoV-2 is, through water droplets. You and I are talking to each other. If we were in the same room, there's absolutely no way I cough anything on you where there's so much virus in that particle, because I'm healthy. My immune system is suppressing those viruses I'm absolutely infected with. But if I wear a mask and suppress my immune system, I will be coughing, and I will be, I won't be able to come to church because I will get sick. I will lead down the path of AIDS and cancer. That I know that. You can hear my lungs now. I know how to deal with this. That's why it's so important what we did with HIV when we recognize God-given immunity. But in Pastor Rob's church, in Godspeak there in Thousand Oaks, there are thousands of people. We're singing. He's there. As he said, he's tested people. People who want to get tested, they're negative. There's no disease in the church. So same thing's true in Church of Ramona. We were in the Ramona stage in April and May with hundreds of people packed in to hear me talk. Go out there in confidence, in full confidence, knowing you have God-given immunity if you protect your immune system, if you keep yourself strong and healthy, not stressed, not fearful, loving, hugging people. And what you see, and that's what they don't want you to do. They want you to hide at home and stay at home because you won't realize, hey, wait a minute, nobody's getting sick. Nobody's gotten sick, including the most vulnerable. My husband's 82 with COPD. And I've, obviously lived with him for 20 years, and he's never, every year we have to worry about him with an infectious disease because he got a microbial pneumonia in his 30s and almost died. Yes, these things are real, but God's given us an immune system. So the only thing I can say is go out and live, go back to church, with great confidence, sing, be happy. I mean, I've never been happier than when I went to church in Ramona. We also go to Harvest Ventura Church on McMillan Street in Ventura, and they're outdoors. And Pastor Brent there, and in fact, the first time we saw him, he was giving a sermon series on biblical truth and clarity. What does the Bible really say? And I was writing the end of our book about the case against the mask, and I literally changed the last chapter based on what that pastor said that day. And it's like, so every place we go, what we were thinking about, our sermon last week was on forgiveness and the parables of forgiveness. And so we have to forgive all of this, but we also have to speak the truth in love. And that's speaking, with our feet feet. You know, I just, every morning I've been printed on my head. I saw the mark of the beast. I'll answer that. But I've been printed on my head, James 1:22, because if I can be quicker to listen, slower to speak, and most importantly, slow to anger, I can continue to find a way to bring people to understand. And at all of those churches where we go, people realize, wait a minute, nobody got sick week after week after week. So our most recent book is The Case Against the Mask, 10 Reasons Why Mask Use Should Be Limited. And these books are all available on Amazon, and our website is plaguethebook.com. But the book, our second most recent book, we wrote this in a heartbeat. It's little more than a pamphlet, and it's like $6. It's like, buy it and put it everywhere, because this is going to calm people down. They're going to say, okay, you know, and it does, because it just discussed both ways, 10 reasons why we limit mask use. We don't cut it out forever. We limit it to the right price. And this is the book, Plague of Corruption. It's now a New York Times bestseller. Bobby Kennedy Jr. wrote the extensive foreword here in this book. And it was eye-opening to me, because I didn't know most of what was in there, but it was other scientists, doctors whose lives have been destroyed, other ways the government, it kind of walks through Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, DDT, Ronald Goldman, and the chickenpox vaccines, and how they destroyed his career when he showed not only they didn't work, but they caused these shingles we see here and there. But both of them are really quick reads. You can get them, since Plague of Corruption is now a New York Times bestseller, you can get it at all major booksellers, even in airports. But of course, I can't go in airports anymore, because you can't even walk in the door without a mask.